Hello there, this is Steve here in Sydney on the Gnosis website, truebluehealer.com, where in just 20 minutes in the beginner's tour, which is completely free, you can discover there's a lot more to yourself than you ever believed, than whatever materialists have ever told you, and that you are far greater and bigger and more capable than you ever knew. You'll find you have a lot less limitations if you just go and do a bit of lay gnosis at truebluehealer.com. And in the first week you'll get some vivid messaging dreams, and later on you'll get an internal mentoring voice, and you can literally get websites typed into your mind's eye. When you don't know what to do, you don't know how to find something, you literally get website titles and names and keywords typed into your mind's eye. Okay, so you can be shown what you need to know for your personal development, okay, which is really all that matters. Okay, you have to live a life story, okay, and helping you get along in your life story, optimizing your travel through your earthbound life is layman's gnosis, specifically for that. And you will get two types of physical evidence to prove to you that what's happening in your mind's eye is not just a wandering imagination. Okay, I commend it to you. 20 minutes and it's free. Physical evidence immediately. Okay, so I have warned in previous videos that the current invasion of Europe is actually just another 1917 Bolshevik revolution on a bigger scale. In the Bolshevik revolution, tens of millions of people either were shot or froze to death in work camps, something like 30 million people. And after that, Germany was the next country on the list, because the Russian Revolution was very successful, done entirely by Jewish agitators, internationalists, revolutionaries. And Winston Churchill explains this. And Germany was the next country on the list, and that really basically led to an attempt to stop the New World Order by Adolf Hitler by arresting a whole lot of Jews in 1933 and literally taking them out of society to take away their influence. And the concentration camps was literally copied from the British. Okay, Adolf Hitler actually did say in one of his speeches that he was copying an old British idea from the Boer War. Okay, putting undesirables in places out of the public eye to save his nation. Okay, now you can argue whether that's right or wrong, or morally defensible or what. But that led to World War II, and now another gulag is being organised, the whole of Europe this time. And the particular aspect of this gulag archipelago, which has been constructed around you while you busily enjoy living your European life, the gates are closing in the form of the most wonderful thing I think about the British people is their wacky sense of humour. I've always loved it. There's no other sense of humour quite like the British sense of humour. And that's been slowly crushed with political correctness. It's got so bad now, a landmark occurrence has occurred. Someone in Scotland made a humorous video about a dog saluting like Adolf Hitler. And it was just street photography. And he went it up to YouTube, lots of people laughed at it. Ha ha ha, isn't this funny? And he was visited by the Scottish police and arrested for posting offensive videos. I don't know if anyone complained, but it's pretty bad when people are getting arrested for making jokes, for goodness sake. Now, what does this actually mean in terms of reality? Well, let me explain it to you in case you haven't thought about it. The grip of political correctness is something like that of a boa constrictor that kills its prey by asphyxiation by tightening its grip every time the prey exhales. The ever-tightening grip, the offensive activities toward average English people, and Europeans also, is basically taken away their sense of humour. This has been quite deliberately done because it's one of the major attributes of British people, their wonderful sense of humour. And let's take that away, say the Zionists, let's get rid of that. Let's dispirit them and depress them so much that even if they laugh, they can be charged with something. We'll have the police visit them. You were seen laughing. You were heard laughing. What were you laughing about? Was it an offensive joke? British police have even taken to lecturing people on Twitter itself about thinking very carefully about what they should post on Twitter. So there's no humour, nothing hurriedly dashed off as a joke. No sarcasms allowed, none of this, none of that. So the British people really had a major attribute. Slowly, the boa constrictor is killing them. And I want you to think of it this way, as if you lose your sense of humour, life is hardly worth living. Now, why are the police so compliant? Why are they letting Muslims do mass crimes and yet visiting white people for doing jokes on YouTube? Well, the reason is common purpose is a Stalinist charity worth about £2 billion a year. It's a mysterious sort of charity. No one knows where their money goes or comes from, but they educate police privately at the weekends in alternative policing, where basically they turn against white people and let everyone non-white, all the migrants, run amok, creating any amount of lawlessness they desire. A case in point recently was Tommy Robinson. I just found one of his videos where he was confronted by 20 Muslim youths armed with visible weapons in front of his own house, and police were called, and the police did swoop, and they arrested Tommy Robinson, for goodness sake, and left the Muslims carrying their visible weapons standing there in front of Tommy Robinson's house. So you've got to ask the question, what motivates the police to do it all wrong? Well, they've been instructed at the weekends privately, outside government training, to make life as difficult as possible for white people. The screws are on white people today, and their sin is being white. It's as simple as that. I'll come to explain that why soon. In this video, Tommy Robinson describes how, wait for it, he's got numerous black friends and yellow friends, Chinese friends, and he says he's there on the ground in Luton seeing his town change dramatically. He says black and white people, so this is not racial, black and white people are being badly oppressed by Muslim gangs, drug dealers, that sort of thing, unemployed or on benefits dealing drugs, that sort of thing. And the police turn a blind eye to the criminal activities of the Muslim gangs who are oppressing black and white people in Luton. Okay, so I'll post this below. It's worth having a look at just to see how things are really going down at street level in England. Okay, they're really going down the gurgler, and it's you can see what's ultimately desired when you what's ultimately coming when you join a few more dots. Okay, that's what this video is about, helping you join a few dots. At the end of this video, there's a link to a wonderful Paul Jones Watson aggressive condemnation of the Scotsman putting up a humorous video and being arrested for it. I think it's a test case to see if it gets any popular support. I don't think it will, but it doesn't augur well for the future, does it? Because, for example, I've made hundreds of offensive videos. It's the only way to get views on YouTube. What's wrong with offending people? Sometimes there's a need for it to wake them up. I'm trying to wake you up in this video, and if I have to use some offensive ideas, I'll put them to you, because I think I'm doing you a service to save your own European civilization. I think that's what's at stake if we don't wake up, okay? Now, I'm taking some big leaps here, but I'm going to try and pull them all together for you, and it goes like this. The recent election by 1.3 billion London Muslims, where the first ever Middle Eastern retard mayor landed in London, and the first thing he did in his acceptance speech was to threaten Donald Trump. For goodness sake, can you imagine a mayor making international threats, declaring war on foreign countries? I mean, doesn't he understand the Westminster system? Obviously not. But that's a sign of what's coming with growing Muslim numbers in British electorates. So already, democracy is wasted, it's gone, it's over, it's finished, it's history. So what should be done next? Well, the answer is Britain really needs to become a police state. Throw away democracy, and that will give whites some breathing space, so they'll have some say in what goes on about white people. Now, there's problems with that, because the actual invasion of all the Muslims is actually orchestrated by NATO. A couple of Wall Street moguls, including George Soros, is linked via so-called think tanks, which control NATO activities, by the way. So NATO is now being used to destroy Europe. So as well as leaving the EU, there's parties in Germany gaining growing support with a growing crime wave, of course, which seems to be inevitable. That's a reaction. There will be a reaction. And there's a party in Germany that wants to secede from the EU. I don't know whether that will be allowed, because Angela Merkel is just an employee and Germany is still a captive nation. It's still occupied by the US. Did you know that? Ernst Zundel explained that once in one of his books. He is a Holocaust denier who's simply interested in highlighting gaps in history and falsehoods in history, and he got jailed for it. Okay, so that's all tied up with this, what I'm talking about. The Gulag Archipelago in Europe being built around you as you live your wonderful life in the physical plane, okay? If you think NATO couldn't be playing a role in the destruction of Europe, the greatest civilization the world has ever known, which is really produced by, a handful of indigenous white nations, General Wesley Clark is a Jewish general, former head of NATO, and he said in the 1990s that Europeans have got to completely forget the idea that they have a right to live in their own country surrounded by their own people, that they were going to have endless millions of people dumped amongst them, and the new world had to be multicultural, you see. That's a cover word for genocide, okay? It's a cover word for genocide. We do notice that General Wesley Clark doesn't advocate multiculturalism in Israel. They have to be kept racially pure, because he knows the value of racial purity, and that's not to be allowed for Europeans. They're not allowed to have it, you see. So he's clearly interested in the destruction of the European peoples, okay? And that's slowly happening. And part of it is the crushing of humour. The fact that you can be literally arrested now for making humorous videos on YouTube is it's a landmark event. It really is. If it continues, civil disobedience was going to have to be brought into play here, and I don't think the police would be resourced to go and arrest everybody who makes offensive videos. They just don't have the resources. Yet they're actually putting resources into doing this, while Muslim gangs run riot around England. It's crazy, isn't it? The depression and the dispiriting of the British people by taking away their humour and they're wonderful comedians, that's a problem, and that's a sign the gates of the Gulag are closing on you, British people. You need to wake up. So instead of you all being put on trains and sent to a camp for Holocaust, it's the other way around. The camps being erected around you with political correctness, and Muslims go first and get all the benefits, and you have to be harassed by the police to keep you away from protesting your way of life being deconstructed. Okay? There's a BBC documentary called The Last Whites in London. Cockneys have vanished. They're a British icon known globally, and they feature in movies and everything, and they have basically been exterminated from where they came from, okay, their district of London. So the Cockneys have vanished, and unsurprisingly a whole lot of Jews are leaving England too, but then it's them actually bringing all these unwanted, undesirable, unassimilatable people in, these enemies of civilization. They're being brought in by Jewish agitators, okay? So Brexit's coming, the possibility of Britain leaving the European Union, and it's not looking good. We really need more idiotic threats of violence from the new London mayor to sway the people who might be having second thoughts about let's play safe and stay in the EU, because it's the EU which is owned and controlled by NATO and operated by a handful of people in Wall Street who want to destroy Europe and England. And they're in the process of doing it. And the destruction of a British sense of humour, which numerous comedians like John Cleese have complained about, political correctness. Seinfeld has talked about it in some detail in interviews and TV shows. And soon there's going to be an offence to laugh. You can see that coming. That's further down the track. So you've got to do something gross, something to break like a circuit breaker, I think they call it. And it's basically you've got to leave the European Union, and I just hope Germany can somehow secede from it. I doubt they can, because they're an occupied country. But that's something you might dwell upon. And I do think martial law is the way to go for England to gain some control over its own destiny. Whether that's possible with NATO affiliation, I don't know. But I think NATO has to be destroyed as well. It's got to be deconstructed. Do consider that. A police state might be a better way of Europeans surviving and getting out of NATO, because NATO hasn't served anyone's benefit, has it really? What's it done? It's bombed the Middle East into the Stone Age to suit the needs of Zionists. NATO is just a Zionist tool which has made Muslims hate Europeans, when we could have just left them asleep, couldn't we, enjoying their third world lives. So, the problem always comes back to Jews and Israel, and I'll just talk about that right now. How could they get that way? Why do they hate the human race so much they want to Holocaust everybody else? Well, I'll give you a clue. Micael Hoffman is a wonderful, a prolific historical writer, and he wrote a wonderful book called Judaism Discovered, and he's still doing that, and it's a wonderful read. It's a $14 download from Kindle, and don't be ashamed if it takes you 3 months to read it. It's written in a very tight, concise, encyclopedic style, and so you really have to sit and think, what is he saying to you line by line? He's a particularly succinct writer, and literally means every word he says. There's no loose frills in his writing at all. So he's always a good read for getting the facts. Okay? So, now he's just put out a colour plate here, and I've got it on screen here. I don't know if you can read it all, but it basically says that, and we're going to try and explain this. How did the Jews ever come to produce books of mysticism where they say that sacrifices to Satan are absolutely necessary for the Jewish people to prevail? So the Jewish people, out of fear of extinction, are required by their mystical books, which they perceive as law, that they have to do sacrifices of one kind or another. Okay? So I don't know if you can read the quote, but I'll put the actual page. You can look at it with the link below this video. Okay? Well, I'm going to give you an hypothesis, an explanation, which is based on ancient astronomical observations about how the Jews could ever come to this belief that sacrifice is necessary for them to survive. Okay? One of our problems is our laid-back enjoyment of the world the way it is, and we tend to assume, well, we've been assured by our scientific people and by our school system that the solar system has always been the way it is now, and you can trace everything back in a nice linear fashion 4.5 billion years, sorry. And you can get star software and all that sort of stuff that will assure you that you can look up the position of a planet or a star 3.9 million years ago. I've got the software. It's wonderful. And it's so convincing, and you play about with it, and it's so easy, and nothing's ever changed for 4.5 billion years. Well, that is probably quite wrong. It's probably just wishful thinking. The truth is quite the opposite. Ancient astronomical records reveal that once upon a time we actually had two suns. The planet Saturn was 4 times bigger than the sun we have now. This was just a few thousand years ago. Astronomical records reveal this. We had another sun, the Saturn, that was stationary in the sky and 4 times bigger than the sun. And guess what it did? It expanded to an even greater diameter and glowed brilliantly and very frighteningly for 7 full days, which probably gave rise to the belief that God created the earth in 7 days. Okay? Now, accompanying this Saturnian activity was massive electrical discharges. I'll try and get you a picture of it here to try and get the idea, the image across to you. That associated with planetary stability in the solar system are electric charges, and if anything moves, there's massive discharges between planets. Saturn was actually a brown dwarf star once upon a time, and in its death throes, it threw this terrible hissy pink fit and rained massive electrical discharges bigger than you can imagine on the Earth. It burped out Venus. This is just a few thousand years ago, and that's why Venus is 800 degrees today, far hotter than the other planets. It's a recently birthed lump of material coming out of Saturn. Okay, now, as well as lightning hitting the Earth in rivers bigger than you can imagine, something like the illustration, rocks and ice and water rained upon the Earth, causing animal extinctions. This is in living human memory. So there were animal extinctions and people extinctions. It was bloody horrifying and terrifying, it really was. And what happened was a lot of people were killed and a few people survived, and they went through the usual problem, psychological problems of surviving the disaster, where people say, why me? How could I survive? I don't deserve to live. One false conclusion that those people could come to in those days when they survived the ice storm, the electric surges from space, and the excavation of the Earth's surface in great cataclysms and the raining of rocks, is that the planet Saturn, sometimes called Satan, chose the survivors as chosen people. We are righteous. That's why we were preserved from the conflagration that killed nearly everybody else. We must be God's chosen people because we're still standing. We've survived the anger of the great god Satan. Okay? So was born the mystical belief written down in holy books that the Jewish people must placate the great god Satan, or Molech or Moloch. Still sacrificed today at the Bohemian Grove, by the way, still practiced by the elites who think they know what they're doing, right? Can you believe it? And sacrifice is necessary to enable the Jewish people to prevail. That's what Micael Hoffman says in that quote. That's directly from a Jewish mysticism book, you see. It will also explain why the Aztecs were cutting the hearts out of people and rolling them down the 52-step pyramid. Do you remember all that stuff? That was to stop the world collapsing. That was to placate gods in the sky, okay? And I think there were other South American tribes that did the same thing. So they had the same traumatised memories from ancient times that we had to keep the gods happy with sacrifices. And sacrifice has been a pretty common thing around the world, okay? Mayors did it, that sort of thing. So, now there's another thing about stress and trauma. It was discovered in the 1990s that people who had serious malnutrition, that's starvation during World War II, were having grandchildren with serious vitamin and mineral deficiencies, meaning their digestion was permanently damaged. They had genetic defects, somehow passed on. I don't understand the mechanism, but it's called epigenetics, and it's now been proven to be a real thing. The trauma affecting an organism can affect organisms further down the track, their children, grandchildren, etc. So, This was proven also with Swedish birth, death and marriage records, where there was a famine in the, I think it was the 17th century, and today there's a very high rate of type 2 diabetes in that Swedish town. And that's because of genetic damage inflicted by severe starvation. Okay, so World War II and 17th century Sweden. Now, do you think there might have been some starvation around the time that Saturn was raining rocks, water, ice and lightning bolts on Earth? Do you think maybe there would have been a bit of starvation? What do you think, huh? It looks to me like epigenetic damage occurred there, and the Jewish people today still suffer post-traumatic stress disorder, which they retain by not outbreeding. They inbreed their own problem to keep it maximised. That's what's going on, and that's why they've all got to breed with their own kind, and they're still sacrificing to the planet Saturn in the sky, which they now call Satan, because of this deep-seated genetic memory, this horrible stress from a long, long time ago, 3, 4, 5,000 years ago, okay? So, and as a result of that, sacrifice is ongoing, according to Micael Hoffman's quote from the Jewish Mysticism book. So, can you see how it all comes together now? Europeans are being holocausted. Just in a copy of the 1917 Bolshevik Revolution, because of epigenetically passed on post-traumatic stress disorder from cataclysmic events in the sky thousands of years ago, which damaged an ethnic group. So much so that they just have to keep sacrificing to keep the sky from falling, just like the Aztecs. And you are the sacrifice. You are the victim of their illness. Okay? Their problem. Their genetically inherited disease, for want of a better phrase. So now you can understand why they've been thrown out of 100 countries for practicing child sacrifice. Okay, can you see that? And also, their post-traumatic stress disorder, which is deeply ingrained in their genetic makeup, is responsible for their refusal to let go of their sacrifice needs. It's on Oprah Winfrey. I'll put that in the playlist after this video. I'll put it below this video too. Oprah Winfrey, Jewish people actually talk about child sacrifice, and it's done to achieve power. Okay? Now, Micael Hoffman's colour plate says it's about Israel prevailing, which is another word for survival as far as I can tell. And they have to survive by sacrificing to keep Satan from dropping rocks, water and ice on them again and nearly destroying the world, because he's an angry, ferocious God. And here you can see how the Old Testament was constructed around Genesis, 7 days creation, an angry God, a violent God raining hellfire and damnation, and surviving people who aren't killed. They believe they are righteous and they are God's chosen people. Completely wrong, because I'm quite certain that lots of righteous people died in the conflagration also. But what can you do where primitive people are concerned? So the nice Jewish lady that had multiple personality disorder from being forced to take part in acts of sacrifice and cannibalism, apparently, that's mentioned in the short 4-minute clip. Oprah Winfrey just listens to it, her mind boggling while she's listening to the calm discussion about child sacrifice. It's been going on a long time now. But she said, the lady says, it's in our holy books of Jewish mysticism, right? Now, that book of Jewish mysticism says that Jews just have to keep sacrificing, okay, to Satan, which is the planet Saturn a long time ago. Have you got that yet? We're falling victim to that today. Okay, that's the problem. Now, the other thing that woman said in the film clip is that they invert the 10 Commandments. Basically, good becomes bad, bad becomes good. So they have like a parallel world they live at home. It's totally different to the world they project to people outside publicly, okay? And that's mentioned, that some people who act so nice, normal, like they're pillars of the community, are actually child sacrifices, child abusers of the worst kind. Okay, that's in the 4-minute Oprah Winfrey clip. Now you might find all these dots I pulled together for you to try and put a picture together as to why Europe and America is facing annihilation at the hands of some people who were traumatised in ancient times and carry basically DNA damage from extreme trauma. And they even wrote holy books praising themselves for surviving this trauma, and they've made a religion out of it, for goodness sake, out of a chance occurrence in the solar system of planets colliding, that sort of thing. That's all it was. Okay, no one is chosen. Most people were killed during that time. The many animals died off too. Okay, but it doesn't give anyone the right to holocaust everybody else. And it's deep down fear that makes these people want to keep sacrificing all the time. And that's got them thrown out of 100 countries, and now they're sacrificing Europe. Okay, and then there'll be someone else. They actually say they want the world to themselves because they can't coexist with anybody else. Quite seriously, their comedians talk like that. Their intellectuals talk like that too. It's hard to believe that anyone could be so perverted. But basically, it's genetic damage from a long, long time ago. So I want you to think about this, dear European, and think about my ideas of the EU has to go, and NATO has to be deconstructed too. I don't know how we're going to do this, but there's got to be grassroots desires to do this, and possibly martial law in Europe to get us out of the mess that we're in, because democracy is finished, it's dead, it's over. You're going to lose Europe if you cling to democracy. So we've got to start biting the bullet and making some pretty rough and tough decisions over there in Europe. So just sort of summarising, can I just say, basically sealed in, locked in, people with their DNA seriously bent out of shape. They carry on these horrifying sacrificial rituals to avoid the sky falling again, and they can't stop doing it because of their DNA is bent out of shape so much they can't live with other people. They can't live with other ethnic groups. So the only solution they see is sacrifice all the other groups, get rid of them. Okay, we'll do it by sacrifice. And they've already killed 30 million people in the Soviet Union. They did a really nice job on Germany, and something like 75 million people died in the conflagration. And that's a lot of good sacrifice, isn't it, to keep the gods happy? And now they're doing Europe. How does it feel to know that you're scheduled to be holocausted out of existence to stop the sky falling? That's basically what it is. The books tell them they must keep sacrificing to Satan indefinitely, which is simply the planet Saturn, for goodness sake. And that's how we got to where we are today, with Europe being destroyed. Okay, so have I given you some stuff to think about? I hope I have.